For the first 6 months, Elias Vance was a sound more than a person. He was the low, steady rumble of a voice from the adjacent cubicle, a sound that vibrated through the thin partition and settled somewhere deep in my sternum. He was the solid thud of a heavy portfolio hitting his desk, the quiet scratch of a fountain pen across thick vellum, the almost inaudible sigh he'd let out around 3 in the afternoon, every single day. I had constructed an entire man out of these auditory fragments, a man of substance and quiet deliberation, a man I was careful never to look at for too long. My own life felt thin by comparison, a series of muted grays and beiges. I was Julian Croft, associate architect, competent, quiet, and utterly forgettable. My days were measured in keystrokes and coffee refills, my nights in the blue glow of a television screen illuminating an empty apartment. I existed in a state of perpetual, low-grade loneliness, a condition I'd long since accepted as my default setting. I didn't date. I didn't try. The effort seemed monumental, the potential for rejection a chasm I had no desire to cross. It was easier to observe, to live in the periphery of other people's more vibrant lives. And I observed Elias. When I did dare to look, the reality of him was always more potent than my imagination. He was tall, with the kind of broad shoulders that strained the seams of his meticulously ironed shirts. His hair was dark, conservatively cut, but a single lock had a stubborn habit of falling across his forehead when he was concentrating. He'd push it back with a slow, deliberate movement of his long fingers, a gesture that felt impossibly intimate from 10 feet away. His face was all clean lines and sharp angles, a handsome face that he kept set in an expression of neutral professionalism. But I saw the other things. The flicker of amusement in his dark eyes when someone made a dry joke in a meeting, the subtle tightening of his jaw when our boss, Mr. Henderson, was on a tear. He was a man of micro-expressions, a language I was becoming fluent in. Then came the Sterling Project. It was the biggest account our firm had landed in a decade, a sprawling, ambitious museum complex that was both a career maker and a soul crusher. Henderson announced the team leads in a Monday morning meeting, his voice booming with false bonhomie. He rattled off a few names, and for the primary gallery design, Vance and Croft, my heart did a painful, stuttering thing in my chest. Vance and Croft, Elias and Julian. The words felt alien, a forced conjunction of two separate worlds. I chanced to look over the partition. Elias was already looking at me. His expression was, as usual, unreadable. There was no pleasure, no displeasure. Just a steady, assessing gaze that made my skin feel too warm. He gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod, then turned back to his monitor. The project was the catalyst. It was the rock thrown into the still, stagnant pond of my life, and the ripples were already starting. Our first real interaction was an exchange of files. He walked over to my desk, his presence a sudden, startling eclipse of the fluorescent office lights. He smelled of something clean and sharp, like bergamot and cedar, a scent that cut through the stale air of recycled oxygen and burnt coffee. "Croft," he said. His voice, without the filter of the cubicle wall, was deeper, richer. It was a physical thing. "Here are the preliminary schematics. I've marked up the sections I think are weakest." He placed a heavy roll of blueprints on my desk. His hand, large and steady, brushed against mine as I reached for them. It was nothing. An accident. A synaptic misfire of proximity. But a jolt, hot and sharp, shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back as if I'd touched a live wire. "I am overthinking this." "It's nothing." "Thanks." I managed, my voice a croak. He didn't seem to notice. His focus was on the blueprints, his finger tracing a faint red line. "The load-bearing calculations here seem optimistic. I want to run them again." His finger was less than an inch from mine. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. I could see the faint dusting of dark hair on his knuckles, the clean, short line of his nails. I was cataloging the geography of his hand while he was talking about structural integrity. He looked up, and for a split second, his eyes met mine. They were a deep, dark brown, the color of wet earth after a storm. And in them, I saw a flicker of something. Not curiosity, not amusement. It was a kind of focused attention, the way a predator might watch a deer before the chase. Then it was gone, replaced by that cool, professional mask. "Let me know what you think," he said, and then he was walking away, leaving the scent of cedar and the ghost of his warmth behind him. I stared at the blueprints, my heart hammering against my ribs. The red lines he'd drawn were a chaotic map leading to a place I was terrified to go. The days that followed blurred into a grueling marathon of late nights and shared takeout containers. Our two separate cubicles effectively merged into one, a chaotic landscape of paper, coffee cups, and material samples. We existed in a bubble of shared stress, the rest of the office fading into background noise. And in that bubble, my observation of Elias became a constant, obsessive study. I learned the rhythm of his breathing, the soft inhale-exhale that was the only sound in the office at 2 in the morning. I learned that he chewed on the end of his pen when he was wrestling with a difficult design problem, leaving tiny indentations in the plastic. I learned that he preferred black tea to coffee after 6 p.m. and that he took it without sugar. These were small, meaningless details, the kind of trivia you accumulate about anyone you spend 18 hours a day with. But to me, they felt like clues, pieces of a puzzle I was desperately trying to solve. The analysis was relentless. Every word, every gesture was filtered through the anxious, yearning part of my brain. When he said, "Good work, Julian," was it just a professional courtesy, or was there a hint of genuine warmth in his tone? When he laughed at a stupid joke I made, a low, rumbling sound that made my chair vibrate, was he just being polite, or did he actually find me funny? I was a detective in an investigation where I was the only suspect and the only victim, torturing myself with maybes and what-ifs. The touches continued, small and fleeting, but they were escalating. One evening, we were both hunched over the same computer screen, reviewing a 3D rendering. I was pointing at a flaw in the atrium lighting, and he leaned in closer to see. His shoulder pressed against mine. It was a solid, warm weight, a point of contact that sent a cascade of fire through my entire nervous system. He didn't pull away. We stayed like that for a full minute, shoulder to shoulder, our heads close together, the scent of his cologne filling my lungs. I could feel the fabric of his shirt, a soft, brushed cotton, against my own. Every rational thought in my head screamed that it was just a consequence of sharing a small space. But my body, starved for contact, interpreted it as something else entirely. It felt deliberate. It felt significant. He finally leaned back, and the absence of his warmth was a sudden, chilling loss. "You're right," he said, his voice a little rough. "That's a problem. Fix it." He didn't look at me. He just stared at the screen, his jaw tight. Another time, I dropped a box of drafting pens, sending them scattering across the floor. Before I could even react, Elias was on his knees beside me, helping me gather them. Our hands brushed as we both reached for the same silver pen. This time, his fingers closed gently around mine for a fraction of a second. It wasn't a handshake, it wasn't an accident. It was a definite, conscious pressure. A squeeze. My breath hitched. I looked up at him, my eyes wide, searching his face for an explanation. He was looking right at me, his expression intense, his lips slightly parted. The air between us grew thick and heavy, charged with a voltage I could feel buzzing on my skin. The moment stretched, pulled taut like a rubber band. Then, from down the hall, Henderson's voice boomed. "Vance, I need to see you." The rubber band snapped. Elias blinked, pulling his hand away. He stood up, all cool efficiency once more. "We'll talk later," he said, his voice low, and walked toward Henderson's office without a backward glance. I was left on the floor, my hand tingling, my mind reeling. "We'll talk later." What did that mean? Talk about the pens? Talk about the project? Or talk about the silent, screaming thing that had just happened between us on the beige linoleum floor? He never brought it up. The incident was absorbed into the relentless churn of the project. But something had shifted. The ambiguity was no longer just in my head. It was real. It was a third presence in our shared space, a ghost that sat at our table and watched us work. The tension was a low hum, a constant thrum of unresolved energy that made it hard to breathe. The breakthrough came during the final, brutal week before the deadline. We were on hour 36 of a 48-hour push, fueled by caffeine and sheer, stubborn will. The office was a tomb, silent and dark save for the glow of our monitors. The city outside was a glittering, indifferent expanse. We had reached a state of shared delirium where the professional boundaries had completely eroded. "I think I'm going to die here," I mumbled, staring at a set of equations that had ceased to make any sense. "My ghost will haunt this cubicle." I'll make sure all the printers jam forever. From across the table, Elias let out a soft huff of laughter. A noble legacy. He stood up and stretched, his back arching, his shirt pulling taut across his chest. I watched the movement, my eyes tracing the lines of his body. He was so relentlessly physical, a solid mass of bone and muscle in a world that felt increasingly unreal. He walked over to the large window that overlooked the downtown skyline. He stood there for a long time, his hands in his pockets, just looking out at the lights. The rigid set of his shoulders seemed to soften. "My ex used to say I was married to this job," he said, his voice quiet, reflective. It was the first time he had ever mentioned a personal life, an existence outside these walls. The words hung in the air, shockingly intimate. I didn't know what to say. "Oh," was all I could manage. He turned from the window, his face shadowed. He wasn't wrong. I don't know how to do less. I only know how to do all. He looked at me, and his gaze was different. The professional mask was gone. In its place was a raw, unguarded weariness, a vulnerability that mirrored my own. "Do you ever just want to stop?" he asked. The question was so direct, so far outside the bounds of our working relationship, that it knocked the air out of my lungs. Not just the project. Everything. Just stand still for a minute and breathe. My heart ached with a sudden, fierce empathy. "Every day," I whispered. The confession was a stone dropping into a deep well. He held my gaze for a long moment, a silent conversation passing between us. It was a moment of profound, unexpected connection, a shared admission of the exhaustion that went deeper than a lack of sleep. It was the quiet acknowledgement that we were two lonely men, working ourselves to the bone in a glass tower, pretending it was enough. He walked back to the table and sat down. He didn't say anything else, just picked up his pen and went back to work. But the air had cleared. The ghost of tension had been replaced by a fragile, tentative sense of understanding. We were no longer just colleagues. We were two people who had seen, for a brief moment, the cracks in each other's armor. It was more intimate than any accidental touch. The project was a triumph. Our presentation was flawless. Henderson, a man not given to praise, clapped Elias on the back and even offered me a tight, reptilian smile. A celebratory happy hour was declared mandatory. I hated work socials. I was an expert at hovering near the edge of conversations, nursing a single beer for 2 hours, and making a quiet exit. But Elias found me by the bar, handing me a glass of whiskey. "You earned this," he said. His smile was small but genuine, and it crinkled the corners of his eyes. My stomach did a slow, pleasant flip. "So did you," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. We stood in a comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the loud, boisterous performance of our colleagues. It felt strangely domestic, the two of us existing in our own quiet bubble amidst the chaos. The ease between us, born from that pre-dawn conversation, was still there. Then Mark from accounting, a man whose smarm was legendary, sidled up to us. He was 3 drinks in, his face slick with sweat. "Croft, Vance, the dynamic duo," he slurred, clapping me awkwardly on the shoulder. "You two practically live together these days. Croft, your apartment must be getting pretty lonely, huh? Still single? A quiet guy like you. You know, my wife has a cousin." His words were laced with a slimy, probing insinuation. He was digging, trying to get a rise out of me. I felt the familiar hot flush of shame and anger creep up my neck. I opened my mouth to deliver a polite, dismissive reply, but Elias spoke first. "He's fine, Mark," Elias said. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it had an edge of solid steel that cut through Mark's drunken haze. He had moved, almost imperceptibly, to stand slightly in front of me. It was a subtle, protective gesture, a shield. Mark blinked, taken aback. "Just trying to be friendly, Vance. No need to get territorial." Elias didn't even look at him. His eyes were fixed on the far wall, but his focus was absolute. "Go find your wife, Mark," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Mark mumbled something and shuffled away, defeated. The entire exchange had lasted less than 30 seconds. My heart was pounding. Elias had defended me. He had put himself between me and the ugliness. He turned to me, his expression unreadable again, but his jaw was still tight. "Let's get out of here," he said. It wasn't a question. He didn't wait for an answer, just started walking toward the exit. I followed, my mind a chaotic whirl of gratitude and confusion. We retrieved our coats in silence and stepped out into the cool night air. The city noise was a dull roar around us. "My car's in the north garage," I said, my voice sounding small. "I'll walk you," he said. The walk to the parking garage was the longest 5 minutes of my life. The air between us was thick with everything that had just happened, with everything that had been building for months. The silence was a living thing, breathing in the space between our footsteps. I was desperate to say something, to thank him, to ask him why he did it, but the words wouldn't form. My throat was tight with a nameless emotion that was equal parts hope and terror. We reached the entrance to the stair tower, a grim concrete structure that smelled of damp and exhaust fumes. The harsh fluorescent lights cast long, distorted shadows. This was it, the end of the night. I would say good night, he would walk away, and tomorrow we would go back to being colleagues. The tension reset, the moment lost forever. "Well, thanks for—" I started, turning to face him. "Wait." The word was a command, low and urgent. He stopped me, his body blocking my path to the stairs. He looked down at me, and the raw, unguarded expression from that late night in the office was back, but this time it was sharpened with a fierce, undeniable intensity. He was searching my face, his eyes moving over my features as if trying to memorize them, or perhaps trying to find an answer to a question he hadn't asked. My back is against the cold concrete wall of the stairwell. I didn't realize I had moved, or that he had moved me. His hands are on my hips, fingers splayed wide, his palms pressing into the bone. The touch isn't gentle. It's a statement. It's an anchor. It's holding me in place. He's so close I can feel the heat coming off his body, see the dark flecks in his brown eyes. The air is gone from my lungs. My entire world has shrunk to this single point in time, to the space between his body and mine. He's not asking permission. He's not hesitating. This is the same quiet deliberation he applies to everything, to a blueprint, to a structural calculation, and now, to me. He dips his head, and his lips meet mine. It's not a soft, tentative kiss. It is a collision. It is months of unspoken tension, of lingering glances, of accidental touches, all compressed into a single, desperate moment. His mouth is firm and warm, and it tastes of whiskey and something that is uniquely, intoxicatingly him. He kisses me with a deep, consuming hunger that I feel echo in my own hollow places. One of his hands slides from my hip to the small of my back, pressing me harder against the wall, against him. The other comes up to cup the side of my neck, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin just below my ear. A sound escapes my throat, a soft, broken thing. And I am kissing him back. My hands, which had been hanging uselessly at my sides, come up to grip his arms, holding on as if the world is tilting on its axis. My knees feel weak, unsteady. The kiss deepens, and it's no longer just a kiss, it's a conversation. It's him saying this. This is what I've wanted. It's me answering, me too, me too, me too. It is relief and terror and a breathtaking, soaring joy all at once. It's the breaking of a dam, and everything I've kept locked away for years is flooding out. He feels it. He pulls back just enough to rest his forehead against mine, his breathing ragged, matching my own. His eyes are closed. "Julian," he breathes, my name a prayer against my lips. And then he kisses me again, slower this time, more deliberate, a kiss of confirmation, of sealing a pact that had just been violently forged. It was a kiss I felt not just in my knees, but in the very marrow of my bones. It was the end of the gray and the beginning of everything else. The next morning, the world was painfully bright. Every color seemed oversaturated. Every sound was amplified. My own skin felt new and strange, every nerve ending humming with the memory of his hands, his mouth. Walking into the office was like walking onto a stage, the spotlight white-hot and blinding. I was convinced everyone could see it. I was sure the kiss was branded on my face, a visible mark of the previous night's cataclysm. Elias was already at his desk. He looked exactly the same. He was staring at his monitor, his expression as calm and unreadable as ever. He didn't look up when I walked past. He didn't acknowledge my existence. A cold, heavy dread began to pool in my stomach. Oh God, he regrets it. The thought was a physical blow. It was the drink. It was the stress of the project. It was a momentary lapse in judgment. I was a mistake. The narrative of my life, the one where I was destined for loneliness, reasserted itself with a vengeance. The beautiful, vibrant color of the morning began to leach away, returning to the familiar, comfortable gray. The day was a special kind of torture. We were in the same space, separated by a few feet of air, but we might as well have been on different planets. I avoided looking at him, and he seemed to be doing the same. The silence was worse than the tension before. It was a dead, empty thing, filled with my frantic, spiraling thoughts. I replayed the kiss over and over, analyzing it, dissecting it, trying to find the flaw, the part where I had misread everything so completely. My work was a blur. I typed emails that made no sense. I stared at blueprints without seeing them. My hands trembled every time I reached for my coffee cup. By 5 o'clock, I felt hollowed out, an empty shell of anxiety. I started packing my bag, my movements stiff and jerky. I just wanted to go home, to crawl into my bed and disappear. This was why I didn't try. This was the chasm. And I had fallen right in. I was slinging my bag over my shoulder when his shadow fell over my desk. I froze, my heart seizing in my chest. I didn't look up. I couldn't. I just stared at the worn corner of my leather portfolio. He said nothing. I felt his presence, the familiar warmth, the scent of his cologne. After an eternity that was probably only 5 seconds, he placed something on my desk, right next to my keyboard. A small, white piece of paper, folded into a neat square. Then, his shadow retreated. I heard his soft footsteps as he walked away. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely pick up the note. I unfolded it. The handwriting was his, a strong, clean script. 2 words at a time. My place. 8. It wasn't a question. It was a direction. It was a continuation. It was the reassurance I was so desperate for, delivered in his typical, understated way. I read the words again and again, the dread in my stomach slowly, miraculously, dissolving. It was replaced by a fragile, fluttering hope. He didn't regret it. He was just being Elias. Quiet. Deliberate. The test was no longer his, it was mine. My life had been a series of passive reactions, of observing from the sidelines. Going to his apartment was an active choice. It was stepping off the curb and into the street. It was terrifying. For a moment, the old fear, the comfortable inertia of my loneliness, tried to pull me back. It would be so easy to go home, to pretend the note never happened, to let this fragile thing wither before it even had a chance to grow. But then I remembered the feeling of his hand on the small of my back, the utter certainty in his kiss. For the first time in a very long time, I wanted to be brave. I arrived at his building at 8 o'clock on the dot. It was a clean, modern high-rise a few neighborhoods over from mine. My journey up in the elevator felt like an ascent into a new atmosphere. When I knocked on his door, my knuckles felt clumsy and loud. He opened it immediately, as if he'd been waiting right behind it. He wasn't wearing his office clothes. He was in a simple gray t-shirt and dark jeans. He looked younger, softer, without the armor of his professional attire. His hair was slightly damp, and the lock was falling over his forehead. "Hi," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Hi," he replied. His eyes scanned my face, and there was a hint of something I couldn't name in them. Nervousness, maybe? The idea that Elias Vance could be nervous was a revelation. He stepped back to let me in. His apartment was a reflection of him. It was minimalist and tidy, but not cold. The furniture was solid, well-made. A large, comfortable-looking leather couch. Shelves filled with books on architecture, history, and fiction. There were a few framed black and white photographs on the wall, stark and beautiful landscapes. It smelled like him, that scent of cedar and bergamot, but gentler here, woven into the fabric of his home. It was a calm, quiet space. A sanctuary. I stood awkwardly in the entryway, not sure what to do with my hands. He closed the door, the soft click echoing in the quiet room. "I'm sorry about today," he said, his voice low. He wasn't looking at me, but at a spot on the floor. "I'm not. I don't do things like this well." "Things like what?" I asked, needing to hear him say it. He finally looked at me, his gaze direct and unflinching. "This. Us. I don't do things I don't mean, Julian. Ever. What happened last night? I meant it. But I didn't know how to act today. I didn't want to put you on the spot." In the office, the relief that washed over me was so profound it almost made me dizzy. "I thought you regretted it." I confessed, the words rushing out. "I thought it was a mistake." A small, sad smile touched his lips. "No. The only mistake was waiting 6 months to do it. 6 months. He had been watching me, too. The thought was staggering. All that time I had spent in my lonely bubble, observing him, he had been doing the same. We were two solitary planets, orbiting each other in silence, each unaware of the other's gravity. He took a step closer. "Can I?" he started, his hand hovering in the space between us. I closed the distance, taking his hand in mine. His fingers laced through mine, a perfect, solid fit. The simple, quiet intimacy of the gesture was more powerful than the desperate kiss in the stairwell. That had been a release of pressure. This was a beginning. "Tea?" he asked, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. "Okay," I said. He led me to the couch, and then went to the kitchen. I sat, my back straight, my nerves still humming. He came back with 2 mugs, the steam fragrant with chamomile. He handed one to me, our fingers brushing. He sat down at the other end of the couch, leaving a respectable distance between us. We drank our tea in silence. It wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, peaceful. It was 2 people learning to exist in a new reality, without the need to fill every moment with words. When we finished, he took my empty mug and placed it on the coffee table next to his. He turned back to me, his expression serious. "I don't know what this is," he said honestly. "I just know I want to find out." "If you do." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I just nodded. He seemed to understand. He shifted closer, closing the distance between us. He didn't kiss me. He just rested his hand on my knee, a warm, steady weight. And we sat there, on his couch, in the quiet of his apartment, simply being together. The frantic energy of the past few months had finally settled. The tension had resolved into a calm, steady current. I must have drifted off, my head eventually coming to rest on his shoulder. I don't remember falling asleep, only the profound sense of safety that enveloped me. It was a feeling I hadn't realized I'd been missing my entire life. I woke slowly, disoriented. The room was dark, save for a single, low lamp in the corner. A soft, warm blanket was tucked around me. I was still on the couch, lying down now, my head on a pillow. For a moment, panic flared, the old fear of waking up alone. But then I saw him. Elias was asleep in a large armchair nearby, his head tilted back, his breathing deep and even. He hadn't gone to his bed. He had stayed. He had watched over me. I lay there, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest in the dim light. I looked around the quiet room, at the books on his shelves, at the coat I'd left slung over a chair, at the 2 empty mugs on the coffee table. It was a scene of simple, domestic peace. There was no grand declaration, no dramatic crescendo. There was just this, the quiet, unassuming start of something real. My entire life, I had felt like I was standing on the outside of a house, peering through the windows at the warmth and light within. But in that moment, lying on his couch, with the weight of his blanket on me and the sound of his breathing filling the silence, I felt a profound shift. I was no longer on the outside. I wasn't even a guest. I was home. I had finally come home.